First tonight to Iran, where the country's leaders have been marking the 47th anniversary of the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Rallies and ceremonies are today being held across the country. It comes as the US President Donald Trump has renewed his threats against the Islamic Republic over its nuclear program, saying the US will have to do something very tough if a deal is not reached. Tehran has always claimed its nuclear program is peaceful. All this comes a month after widespread anti-government protests, which were followed by a bloody crackdown from the authorities. Human rights groups say they've been able to verify the deaths of almost 7,000 people, but that the real death toll is probably considerably higher. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is meeting President Trump this evening at the White House to push the US to expand the scope of nuclear talks with Iran. Israel insists Tehran must not only stop all uranium enrichment, but it must also cut its ballistic missile program and support for armed groups across the Middle East. Tehran has repeatedly rejected such demands, saying it's ready to limit its nuclear program in return for sanctions relief.
I think these things reflect the unique closeness and extraordinary relationship that we have with the United States and I have personally with the President, something that has never been equally in our history. On his trip, we will discuss a number of issues, Gaza, the region, but of course first and foremost the negotiations with Iran. I will present to the President out ideas about the principles in the negotiations, the important principles. And in my opinion, they are important not only for Israel, but for everyone in the world who wants peace and security in the Middle East. We are honest with the world and with our own people. We are not seeking nuclear weapons. We have declared this time and again, and we are prepared for any kind of verification. However, the high wall of mistrust that the United States and Europe have built, through the very statements they make, does not allow these talks to reach a conclusion. Our Iran will not bow to their excessive demands, nor will it back down in the face of injustice and aggression. We are fully committed to peace and stability in the region and are engaging in dialogue with our neighboring countries. The problems of the region can be solved by those who live in it, not by outsiders who come from afar claiming to resolve our issues.
And that's Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian, and before him the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Well, for more on all this, I'm joined now on the line from London by the author and international affairs analyst, Dr. Laskiewicz. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And we know that Iran has been battered, its nuclear program contained, and its regional militia allies severely downgraded. Is it still a real threat to the US and Israel?
Well, if the US and Israel maintain it's a threat, then obviously there is some sort of threat. The question is to what extent? Now here there is indeed some debate, and it's quite clear that there are two different versions. One is the intelligence that's coming out that implies that Iran is carrying on as before as best it can. And the other is that Iran can't do anything quickly and has no intention of doing anything. In this difficult situation, obviously, USA and Iran will meet and hopefully can resolve the issue. There is a further problem here in that Iran is insisting upon further conditions, and this, I think, is going to be the stumbling block in the sense that whether it would ever cease to support groups outside Iran is entirely debatable.
Well, I mean, just looking at the nuclear program, last June, President Trump said he had completely obliterated Tehran's nuclear program. I mean, what has changed now? Was he just making a big statement and the reality is that the capabilities and the know-how are still there and it is still an open file?
Well, certainly the know-how, insofar there was any, is still there, and some capabilities of some sort have either been rebuilt or were not fully destroyed. And President Donald Trump has a habit of, one can put it, overstating his achievements. And so none of these are at all contradictory. What is the question is how far it has know-how and capabilities. This is unclear. There is not a consensus on this point because it depends if you do believe the intelligence or not that's coming through from the Western Israel.
And in that regard, I mean, how real is the specter of US military strikes on Iran? I mean, we've heard President Trump renewing his threats against the Islamic Republic, warning that the US will have to do something very tough.
They're very real threats, but quite possibly for a second reason, which so far hasn't been presented here. It has to be borne in mind that the weapons of mass destruction of Saddam Hussein's Iraq simply never existed. And there's some people assert never did exist. The whole thing was simply an excuse to contact Iraq. Well, in this case, there may be an excuse needed to conquer Iran, which would be very difficult, so more likely to bring about regime change in Iran. So therefore, this second reason is the important one, because then it really doesn't matter what Iran is doing or not doing. The very fact that the president has asserted that there is this problem, just as happened previously in the case of Iraq, will suffice for America to attack. The point is, it all depends what the goal is. And President Donald Trump has been talking previously in terms of regime change there. And so, therefore, I think it's the second reason which is the most important. And the first that we've been discussing up to now is just so much excuse, if you like, to put it that way.
And from the Iranian perspective, I mean, with both the verbal and military pressure mounting on Tehran, is it likely that the authorities there will agree to a deal further limiting their nuclear program?
I have the impression that Iran is prepared to agree to something, but not nearly as much as Israel wants. And it would appear to be not as much as America wants. Please do remember that if it is regime change that USA is after, Iran's never going to agree to it. So the key question is, what precisely does America envisage? A total bombardment of Iran? A bombardment of just the capital, Tehran? The support for movements to overthrow the regime in Iran? In one sense, the people running Iran have one huge advantage. It seems most unlikely that America could actually invade Iran to carry out a regime change or to force the issue. And so, if they were sufficiently stubborn, then actually they could have a degree of success. I assume, though, they are prepared to agree to something, but not nearly as much as America and Israel, especially Israel, would want.
Now, you mentioned a hot second ago the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's, of course, being hosted by President Trump currently in Washington. What do you reckon he's looking for? Because he doesn't seem to be too enthusiastic about these talks between the US and Iran, the US and Iran, yes, that are taking place in Oman.
I don't think he is enthusiastic, no, but the real problem with Israel is that it has developed now this tendency just to think everything in terms of bombing and missiling and thinking that its problems will be solved. Whereas paradoxically, it does state in the Bible that he who lives by the sword perishes by the sword. Implication is quite clear. Missiles and bombs will not suffice. But it is true that he is unsatisfied, I think, with what America is seeking. We like to go a whole lot further. The problem is how far America is prepared to support these points of view. There is, of course, the theory that Israel can indeed, how can you put it, steer the president. And if this is the case, and this is what will emerge soon, then USA will up its demands. And I think there is indeed a strong possibility that America will take on board Israel demands and seek to some degree also to put them into its negotiations and so to implement them if it can.
And all of this, of course, taking place against this very tense domestic situation in Iran and what appears to be an almost existentialist moment for the regime after the brutal crackdown on the protests last month. So a very volatile situation right now, would you say?
Yes, the scale of the protests certainly surprised, I think, the current regime. Whether it is as tense as you imply, it's hard to say. What Iran certainly has done is disable the protests at some cost, suffering, of course, for the protesters, and also for its ability to be a normal country in any degree. It has disabled things with the internet and so on. There is indeed a tense situation. It is something to be borne in mind. Certainly, the Americans will be thinking in terms of the protesters for possible regime change. And therefore, yes, it is a factor for the current regime in Tehran to take into account. It's not actually fatal or existential as such, but it is serious. And certainly, if America were to push, there would appear to be support for regime change in Iran, as a result of which there could be a bigger problem for the regime in Tehran than would otherwise have been the case. So, yes, it is a tense situation there, and this will undoubtedly strengthen the American and Israel's hand.
And in that respect, is what President Trump betting on, that the Iranian government has been so weakened that at this point they'll give more than they've given in the past? But of course, that is yet to be seen because the regime seems to be digging in, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm not sure, unfortunately, that President Donald Trump can go that far in thinking that regime change will happen or the threat of it will make the Tehran more malleable. It is a factor for them to take into account. However, they have also some positive aspects, namely that I think an invasion of Iran or regime change in Iran is very difficult. And in that respect, they could dig in, as you put it, and to some extent, they are already stating they are digging in, but I still expect some degree of movement from their position. That's what they've also indicated. And as a result, if this slight movement suffices, that would call off the American invasion. The problem is I don't think that it will suffice, and therefore America will be faced with this decision whether to go in or not.
Thank you, Dr. Laskiewicz. We appreciate your assessment. Dr. Marek Laskiewicz is the author and international affairs analyst talking to me on the line from London.